Hi everyone, welcome. I'm Justin Keogh. I'm an acquisitions editor for culture and technology at the MIT Press. We are thrilled to be co-hosting this event with the Digital Public Library of America, and I'm excited for you all to meet today's author. Emily West is professor of communication at the University of Massachusetts Amherst. Her research focuses on promotion, technology, and culture, as well as audiences, users, and consumers. In addition to being the author of Buy Now, she is co-editor of the Routledge Companion to Advertising and Promotional Culture. Her research has appeared in journals including Surveillance and Society, International Journal of Communication, and Journal of Consumer Culture. Emily will start us off with a brief presentation and then be joined in conversation by Cindy Aden. Cindy is currently the Bill and Melinda Gates Endowed Chair at the Information School of the University of Washington. In addition to her work in academia, she has also served as a librarian in public library systems and the private sector. In fact, Cindy was a librarian for Amazon.com while it was still a startup. She was employee number 750. She and a colleague were recently awarded a one-year Mellon Foundation grant to visit and learn from tribal libraries in Washington state. Following the discussion between Emily and Cindy, we will have some time at the end. Sorry, my nose got clouded here. We will have some time at the end of the program for audience Q&A. Emily and Cindy, welcome to you both. And Emily, please take it away.
Great. Thank you so much for those introductions, Justin. Justin and I have corresponded actually for a long time over email. It's the first chance we've had to see each other, so that's fun. Thanks so much to the DPLA for inviting me and working with MIT Press on this talk today, for making all the arrangements, and especially for lining up Professor Cindy Aden, who is such an appropriate and interesting respondent for the subject matter of my book, as I'm sure you can tell from the introduction. So in preparing for this event, I learned more about the mission of the DPLA, which is to, quote, maximize access to our shared history, culture, and knowledge by empowering and equipping libraries to make information more accessible. So at the core of this mission is an interest in the conditions under which information and culture are circulated and distributed. So give me a second now to share my screen and complete this little segue. As it happens, my book, seen here, Buy Now, is the first in a new series at MIT Press called Distribution Matters. This is a series that's highlighting questions of media distribution and therefore of access. And here's where I'm going to actually plug my book at the beginning of the talk, which I think isn't really the done thing. But I did want to point out MIT Press's commitment to making the books they publish broadly accessible. So what you can see here is that the ebook version of Buy Now, and actually many other titles at MIT Press, is open access. So it's free to anyone who's willing to read it and download it as a PDF. So on this theme of distribution, the power that Amazon has come to have in shaping the distribution of books, media, and products in American society and beyond is one of the motivating issues that led me to do this research. I'm not going to have time today to go into all the details of Amazon's market dominance and the rapidity with which it has come about, but Amazon's monopoly, or at least dominance, of particular markets, such as book and ebook distribution, ebook publishing, online sales of consumer electronics, are probably familiar. This company, which is among the most market capitalized in the world for a number of years now, enjoys significant market capture and unprecedented market synergies across multiple business areas, including now cloud computing, digital devices, logistics and last mile delivery, and AI voice services. So where did this book begin? The genesis for this, for me, was a moment in August of 2015. I was reading New York Times headlines on my phone, and I suddenly found myself transfixed by this article, Inside Amazon, Wrestling Big Ideas in a Bruising Workplace. It's an investigative piece that describes harrowing and, according to the reporters, psychologically abusive working conditions at Amazon headquarters in Seattle, in its white-collar offices, although they also described reporting on unsafe, unreasonable working conditions at some Amazon warehouses. So when reading this, I was a longtime Amazon customer. I looked up my account. I'd been a customer since the year 2000. And I'd, become part of the Amazon.mom program when I had kids. I then became a Prime member. And I was suddenly and painfully aware of my own complicity in supporting these workplace practices through my purchases over the years. I started to think about how I had come to spend so much time and money with this company almost without noticing, and how little thought or awareness I had of what went on behind the scenes to get me these packages in what was frankly an astonishingly short amount of time. When I think about the potential risks that a business the size and breadth of Amazon poses to both competitive markets and to democratic governance, I also think that the relationship that Amazon has with its customers is important because it impacts whether or how we respond as citizens to its market power. So that is why I focus in my book on how Amazon has cultivated itself as a brand and its relationships with the consumers, and how those efforts are aimed at making its size and power seem normal, inevitable, and maybe even comforting. But while Amazon aims to blend in with the furniture, just like its Echo smart speaker devices, I want to make its ubiquity more visible in order to make Amazon's market and political powers more salient and open to evaluation and critique. Now, Amazon isn't just a large, successful, complicated company. It's also long been a widely loved and trusted company. When we think of the brands that people love, I think our minds tend to go to classic product brands like Coca-Cola or Harley-Davidson or Nike, or perhaps to entertainment brands like Disney, Marvel, or the NHL. These are the brands that maybe people get tattoos of, or they spend their own money to advertise by wearing branded sweatshirts or hats. And Amazon doesn't really work like that. It doesn't have a lot of merch to speak of. And if there's a trend of Amazon smile tattoos, I'm certainly not aware of it. But nevertheless, Amazon has ranked as one of the most loved and trusted brands in the United States for a number of years. Here's just one example survey that showed Amazon as the #2 most trusted institution out of all institutions, beyond just corporations and brands in 2018. Admittedly, those rankings have taken a bit of a tumble since the start of the pandemic. But why has Amazon of all brands been so loved and so trusted? It doesn't have a cuddly mascot, doesn't have a ton of emotional ad campaigns or inspirational taglines. It generally communicates via simple, memorable shapes and colors. The Amazon smile and Amazon orange or prime blue. Its website is pretty utilitarian. Its packaging is simple. But I think there are 3 key reasons for the attachment and affection that consumers have for Amazon. So one is just the sheer frequency of the touches and interactions that we have with Amazon. Independent of kind of any advertising or conventional marketing it might be doing, it sees every touch point or moment that we interact with it as kind of this marketing opportunity, a way to forge this relationship with its customers. Secondly is the personalization of its services, and therefore of the customer brand relationship itself. And the third is how these together are experienced as a form of care from the brand for the customer. So I'll touch on all of these things in the rest of my remarks. So first of all, the frequent touches. If you're an Amazon customer, you might never meet an Amazon employee or talk to one on the phone, but you will likely touch many an Amazon box. Amazon knows how important these boxes are to the feelings that customers build over time with the company. So they have put a lot of design attention on their packaging. So that's, the way they brand the box with the smile, the way they use the tape to make it very recognizable to promote other products and services or the Prime membership. Having this frustration-free packaging program. This is a program that encourages that packages should be easier to open and not use excess materials. So we have these physical and perhaps frequent touches with the brand, but Amazon also builds anticipation for these very deliveries with communicative touches. So via emails or push alerts, they notify customers when an item is shipped, when they can expect delivery, when it's out for delivery, when it's a few stops away, and then when delivery has occurred. And sometimes they even provide a photograph like this showing that it in fact arrived. So these communications are all about time, how quickly it's coming, and they only invoke space when your package is within the last few stops in order to build anticipation for this magical moment when it arrives. These communications anticipate and perhaps construct what the scholar Sarah Sharma has called a time-starved subject, someone for whom others' lives are orchestrated in order to save them precious time. It's an invitation to subjectivity that's been central to Amazon's brand since launching the Prime membership in 2005, which at that time promised 2-day delivery on over 1 million products, bundled in with the Prime membership. And then they updated that in 2019 to 1-day delivery on over 10 million products. So I see this as part of how Amazon cultivates distribution fetishism. So this is my play on Marx's classic notion of commodity fetishism. So while Marx focused on how we mystify commodity production, how things were made, by whom, where their value really comes from, I've come to see Amazon as largely intent on mystifying the process of commodity distribution so that we might focus only on the magical moment of a brown box appearing on our doorstep. And certainly, it's quite rare that you actually pay directly for shipping on Amazon, especially if you're a Prime member. So that certainly contributes to this mystifying quality. I don't view this as some kind of a conspiracy on Amazon's part, but really a natural outgrowth of Amazon's longtime #1 operating principle, customer obsession. Knowing about the behind the scenes Herculean efforts and resources that get our purchases to us doesn't necessarily enhance our convenience and delight. In fact, it might significantly disrupt it. Nevertheless, over time, due to the activism of warehouse workers and the efforts of investigative journalists, questions and concerns about the nature of the warehouse and delivery work have come to light. So hence, Amazon's development of fulfillment center tours for the public. This is me at the YYZ Amazon Fulfillment Center in Brampton, Ontario, on a tour in 2019, where I got to see various stages of products being placed across the warehouse and then collected or picked and boxed for people's orders. After encountering the space and the scale of resources and effort devoted just to getting products from truck A to truck B, let alone to our actual doorsteps, the competitive business advantage that Amazon clearly thinks accrues from its Prime promise of 1 or 2-day delivery times becomes very real. The theme of customer obsession reverberates on these tours, where exhortations to delight the customer are painted on the walls for the benefit of employees, and tour guides reminded us that everything in the warehouse was there, in fact, to serve us as the customer. So in addition, though, to the ease and the convenience of fast deliveries, Amazon seeks to delight the customer through personalized service. So of course, this isn't the personal service you get from a hotel concierge or a hairdresser, but this is personalization on a massive scale with the help of computing and machine learning. And Amazon has been doing this since its earliest days. From the time of Amazon.com's launch, the site was assigning each customer who visited a unique ID and collected data about user actions on the site. In Amazon's early years, CEO Jeff Bezos, seen here in 1998, shared his vision of personalizing the entire online store, saying if we have 4.5 million customers, we should have 4.5 million stores. While Amazon initially invested in a lot of book and music editors who provided reviews and expert recommendations, it didn't take all that long to transition to automated yet personalized recommendation engines. Now, the pinnacle of this personalized service is no doubt Amazon's leading digital voice assistant, Alexa. Personalized, interactive, domestic, and familiar, Alexa exemplifies Amazon's aim to be the ultimate service brand. Now, some users may find something creepy about being known by an AI, but my observations of reactions to Amazon's personalized service and to the incredibly rapid adoption of Alexa via smart speakers suggest that it's more typically received as a form of care. Fundamentally, Amazon offers to serve us by knowing us, including the domestic private side of ourselves represented by our product searches, our purchases, the media we consume, and now with Alexa, what we say and how we say it. Alexa deepens Amazon's service relationship with its customers due to the affective nature of the human voice and the real-time experience of personalized service in domestic space. In other words, Amazon's tools and techniques of surveillance create tremendous intimacy between consumer and brand, achieved through the sensations of being seen, heard, and known. Amazon's instructions to third-party developers who are creating what are called Alexa skills, which is where you use Alexa to interact with a company's product or service, instruct them to have Alexa demonstrate to the user that she is listening and remembering. So it's not a secret or something under the radar. It's like, no, Alexa should remember context and past interactions, as well as knowing a customer's location and meaningful details in order to maintain familiarity and be more efficient. Receiving Alexa's attentiveness, which she does very obviously as care, is of course then facilitated by the service's default woman's voice, which locates her easily within a feminized spectrum of care roles like mother, wife, housekeeper, and personal assistant. So Alexa is increasingly being designed not just to respond to user requests, but anticipate requests and needs, obviously with the use of predictive algorithms. So earlier this year, Senior Vice President and Head Scientist for Alexa said, the AI should anticipate your needs and help you by saying, hey, I think you left your bedroom light on and you're in the kitchen. So again, making it clear you're being watched and in a way that is supposed to deliver care. In addition, Amazon and I think other tech companies have been developing the capability to respond to the emotional and physiological qualities of our voices. So this is a patent from a number of years ago that shows that the Alexa could notice that the user sounded like they had a cold and then suggest items for purchase that would be relevant if you're not feeling well. And now they actually have a smartwatch, and a tone of voice analysis is part of one of the features of the smartwatch. So knowing intellectually that these interactions are from machines doesn't necessarily mean that they're not experienced as care. I'll illustrate this point through a personal example. So these are shoes I bought a few years ago on Amazon, a little bit on an impulse. I was envisioning like very confident teaching moments, very fun parties. They showed up and they actually were just a bit too big. You see it runs small, so I got a bigger size, but it was actually too big. They were very stiff. I just thought these actually are not going to work. So I sent them back. And then about 6 weeks later, I got an email from Amazon saying, we noticed you made a return, but you haven't received a refund. So if that's the case, follow these steps and we'll make sure you get your refund. So I did as instructed and did get my refund. So I was intellectually aware that the prompt was automated. It's probably flagged by an algorithm that notices when there's a slow refund for returned merchandise. But I can honestly, and with appropriate embarrassment, report that I felt very cared for and seen in that interaction. The company identified a problem I didn't even know I had and went out of its way to solve it for me. So this I see as an example of relationship marketing, paying attention to the interactions across time, not just when you're trying to get someone to make a purchase. And it cements an affective bond between customer and brand. So I've been speaking about the quality of the relationship between Amazon and its customers, because I don't think Amazon could have gotten so big or moved into so many business areas and extracted so many concessions from various levels of government without the consent, participation, and enthusiasm of consumers. Amazon works hard to create more products and services that keep consumers having more interactions and spending more time on its various platforms, be that the e-commerce platform, the Kindle, Prime Video, Alexa, or one of its many corporate acquisitions like the video doorbell company Ring. And the more time we spend with Amazon, the more it knows about us. Amazon's core business is arguably data itself. It's very proprietary about all the data it gathers, and it uses it to sell digital advertising, which is one of its biggest businesses now, identify business opportunities, and customize its services to consumers. So we feel less tempted to leave the Amazon so-called ecosystem and go elsewhere. Their goal, we might say, is platform enclosure. And while we're enclosed in Amazon's platforms and experiencing its personalized services as a form of care, I argue that our sense of what it even means to be a consumer changes. Since we've moved into consumer capitalism, where the spending of everyday consumers is so central to the economy, we've generally thought of the consumer as a choosing subject. So the market provides an abundance of options, and consumers are invited to create their identities, relate to others, and exert their consumer power via the mechanism of choice. Choice is this key idea when it comes to modern identities and a thread that connects being a consumer with being a citizen. What I see in the relationship that Amazon cultivates with consumers is a shift from a choosing subject to a served self. The served self prioritizes ease and seeks out products and services that are customized and personalized. They select from a limited menu of choices, or sometimes not at all, that have already anticipated their needs and preferences. So by and large, the work of consumption and the labor of choice gets absorbed by the brand and is provided as a service, all made possible, of course, by the surveillance that has come to feel like care. Whereas the choosing subject undertakes consumption in a more active way, the served self-consumption is more passive. So Amazon is encouraging us to spend more and more consumption and entertainment choices within its own platforms and to be guided by its recommendations and the nudges of its search algorithms, to select its Amazon's choice product over other options, to subscribe and save so products just come on a steady schedule with no effort from us, and to buy now with just one click from a product page when time is of the essence. The gradual shift from choosing subject to served self may be hard to perceive, perhaps embedded in daily habits and ways of thinking, but it's one of the distinctive costs of the convenience that Amazon offers. Again, Alexa represents the pinnacle of this strategy. So on the one hand, Alexa makes consumption hands-free. So that's one kind of work you don't have to do, like the tapping and the typing. But Alexa also streamlines choices more than a graphical interface because long lists of options are time-consuming and unwieldy through the medium of voice. So here's an example, again, from the Alexa design guide that illustrates how Alexa effectively makes choices for the user in the name of efficiency and convenience. So here the user makes an admittedly vague request. Alexa, ask A to Z restaurants to order me some pepperoni and olive pizzas. So Alexa understandably might have questions, like, should I ask how big these pizzas should be, or how many, or how to distribute pepperoni and olives? But the design guide says, no, don't do that. Just use your best guesses, which no doubt is from the past behavior of this user or of users in general when they use this skill, and make those decisions. Okay, that's 3 medium pepperoni and olive pizzas. Would you like anything else? And if it's wrong, the user can correct it. But if in fact what they want is for Alexa to kind of do it for them, make the choices for them, then that's been provided and no doubt is part of the appeal of this service. So it's all super convenient. It democratizes personal service in some sense, and it may even be flattering the way a mega brand like Amazon and its persona Alexa are devoted to the delight and ease of the consumer. But my concern is that the served self is a more individualized and depoliticized way of being a consumer than the choosing subject. Amazon has earned a lot of consumer trust, and as it moves into a growing array of services, especially these home-based Internet of Things services, it has the opportunity to make consumers feel cared for by the brand. This trust and sense of pastoral care too easily translates, though, into complacency in the face of the extent of Amazon's powers of governance and of alleged abuses of market power. These are much discussed in the press, on Capitol Hill and Judiciary Committee hearings, and examined by regulators in Europe and the United States. As current US Federal Trade Commission Chair Lena Khan has put it, monopolies are bad, not simply because they threaten to, lead to higher consumer prices or even necessarily undermine productivity and growth, but monopolies are bad because they're bad for democracy. Can the served self be a meaningful check on Amazon's power as a trillion-dollar platform company? What is the future of consumer politics when consumers and consumption are so fragmented and differentiated in the digital world? And when so many resources are devoted to delighting us, sometimes at the expense of workers, communities, and the environment? In the 1980s, the noted media scholar Neil Postman memorably argued that by spending so much time with mass entertainment like television, Americans were amusing ourselves to death. My study of Amazon leads me to ask whether, rather than amusing ourselves to death, we are being now served to distraction by the personalized service of ubiquitous platform giants like Amazon. So that's what I've prepared today. I'm very anxious to hear your responses, but thank you so much again for inviting me, and look forward to your feedback.
Emily, thank you. I think I will jump in here and we'll have a conversation, and I hope that our audience will prepare some questions for us. I really enjoyed your book, and I was happy to have this opportunity to speak with you because it made me pick up the book and read it. And, I have a million things sitting by my bed, but this rose to the top. And there were some great terms. I was reviewing all my notes because I would stick in little like placeholders. I actually read it in paper format, which isn't how I normally read. But when I'm reading something really factual, I find it's better comprehension. And I bet a lot of people have found that there's actually research on that now, that it's an easier way to take in a complex topic. But you had words like entanglement. You talk about cognitive injury. I love the notion of the served self, the ubiquity of Amazon and what the implications are. The pleasure garden concept, which is sort of like the captive platform. There are lots of great ideas in this book, and I hope people are going to be inspired to want to read it. I really found it interesting. I know one of the reasons that DPLA invited me to do this talk with you is because of my experience with Amazon way back in the past. So just for contrast, I'm just going to say that something you said reminded me when you said it doesn't have a warm fuzzy logo or kind of a mascot. And then I thought, oh, but it did. In the very early days of Amazon, two of the key early employees, Eric and Susan Benson, he was a developer. She was a fabulous person who did a lot of great things in the early days of the company, kind of a project manager. Anyway, those two had a very cute little dog. And I know I should know its name, but I'm blanking on it. I think it was a corgi. And before any new page launch would occur, which was usually right at midnight, that little pup had to put his paw on the keyboard. And for a while, before the page got really cluttered, that little dog's face was actually on Amazon. I wonder if we could go back through the Wayback Machine and see pictures of that dog. Anyway, the point is, it used to be a small company. Even as employee number 750, it felt like you knew most people, and people were so excited about the ideas they were coming up with and the ways that they were solving problems for consumers. And this is really my point, thinking about how do the picture you paint, even though you're quick to say it's a natural evolution in a capitalist country, these kinds of improvements and changes are going to naturally occur. A company is going to figure out how to get bigger, but it comes across as looking sort of evil and scary. And you're trying to get consumers' attention to pay attention to what's behind the curtain. But it's so interesting to watch that progress. And so I guess that's my question for you. I remember those editors and how grateful publishers were, because mid-list books or unknown books were suddenly rocketed to being bestsellers because the editors would pick up on them and talk about them. And I remember how consumed the staff were on doing the right thing for customers and how freeing it was to make big, bold decisions to serve customers better. I remember a librarian up at the Arctic Circle. He stopped me at a library conference and said, I have $16,000 this year for my book budget. I'll give you the entire book budget if you'll take a check, which Amazon didn't take back then, because you guys deliver faster than any of the book distributors in the library world. And so you're the one I want to use. So how does it go from that to this? And how intentional do you think that progress was? I'm thinking about this because of the individuals that I remember from the early days. What is your thought on how that progress happened and how we let a company, you've spoken something about that, but how a company lets itself get to this point?
Yeah, I appreciate that. And, obviously it's fascinating to me, and I'm sure to everyone, to hear from you, directly on what the vibe and ethos was at Amazon when you were there. Yeah, I think it seems, there's quite a few, we talked about before, you and I, there's quite a few business books out there that kind of, have told a little bit of this more behind the scenes history. And I think we can also look back and just see sort of the logics around big tech and some of the financial pressures and logics. So I mean, one of the things you mentioned in your remarks was, how exciting it was for publishers in those earlier days, like this new distribution platform that was so powerful and was so strong for, you were saying the mid-list books, but even like the long tail, right? Like, wasn't that first book that was ever sold on Amazon was like quite a scholarly computer science book.
Right.
And today,
Fun.
it's this platform for like people to self-publish. My own father actually is publishes his own fiction and essays on Amazon and sells, modest numbers of books that way. So, but nevertheless, as time goes on, it seems that publishers like really didn't anticipate or think through what it would mean when such huge proportions of books were being sold on Amazon. And even if a book isn't sold on Amazon, it's such an important place to find out about books, right? Like that's where people, do their research. I think that's true of not just books, but all products. So Amazon is like the leading search engine for products.
Right.
So even if you decide not to buy something there, the way it's placed or presented there, or the way it's reviewed there is incredibly powerful. And it's unfortunate to know that Amazon, went on at various times to kind of put pressure on various publishers by, to negotiate better deals, to kind of give them, less and less of a cut, to extract ebooks on the launch of the Kindle. Like that's a fairly famous story of saying, if you don't send us like this list of titles formatted for the Kindle, we'll bury your books on the platform. So it's just the size that Amazon got, and the fact that it could, turn the screws right on, various vendors or partners, or however you want to think about these relationships. When you can get that big, the temptation is there. And not that Amazon never does things that are good, but it's like, do we want a company to be in that situation vis-a-vis any particular product market where, of course, when they're so big and people are so dependent on them and they're thinking, oh, what we need is, we have to get this Kindle out, or we have to meet a certain growth target, or we have to be the dominant player in such and such a market. The temptation, I think, is too great there. And then there's nowhere else for people to meaningfully go, right? Because ideally that's, if capitalism was working right, like there would be, a way for these other companies to perhaps punish Amazon for, not being a good partner or a good market actor. And so part of the, is part of this just like human temptation, like we're the biggest, we're the best, and we should be the biggest, we should be even bigger, we should be even better. And so let's use that power to make that happen. And then how much of it too is just the sort of shareholder capitalism that we're in, where there's such a pressure to be always growing and to do no matter what it takes to make that happen, and so that you can then in turn get more investment capital. I mean, that's something that even within the business community there's a lot of questions about. Like businesses perhaps used to see themselves more as members of the community who had obligations to their workers, to their customers, to their communities, and yes, to their shareholders. But it seems like not just for Amazon, but more generally, that's gotten out of whack. And the final thing I'll say, it's probably too many things, just like the logics of platform capitalism are kind of unique, right, compared to other kinds of businesses. Like the scale and rapidity of that growth with a digital platform is kind of different than we've seen perhaps with other types of companies. And so we've seen similar types of things play out in like the Googles and the Apples of the world.
Right. Yeah. Well, let me pick up on one of your threads. One of the things, it was so great that you and I got to talk before this talk to kind of share what we knew and get to know each other a little bit. And one of the facts about you that really delighted me is where you're from, your hometown, because I've been there. It's a beautiful little place. I think I was there, I was thinking in May. It's right near Niagara Falls for the audience. It's absolutely charming. Niagara on the Lake, is that what it's called?
Yeah.
And so when you talk about the old attitudes of business and how they were connected to community, those chambers of commerce, the ways they would always contribute to their communities, and the ecosystem that existed between consumers and businesses in a smaller, more local setting. And I think of your hometown, and I think your town in particular is dependent upon its charm. It needs to have shops and cafes because people go there to walk around. Have you seen Amazon as such a convenient and ubiquitous option play out any differently in a community like your hometown, where its own personality and ecosystem is so important?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think there is a long-standing Niagara, the oldie Niagara on the Lake bookstore, something like that. It's been there a long time. I think it's still there and managed to survive. Amazon certainly played a role in shutting down, big box bookstores, right? Like Borders didn't make it. Barnes and Noble really struggled. Independents did really poorly for a while and then actually have been bouncing back.
Mhm.
I tend to think it's less likely to be making that kind of impact on the main street in a town like Niagara on the Lake, which I'm so excited that you've been to, because there's this inherent entertainment value to walking down the street, and browsing and things like that. So I think it's more in your sort of average town that isn't necessarily a tourist destination that we've seen the impact of e-commerce, and of course, Amazon being the big player there, especially with regards to a product category like books, play out. So where people are shifting their spending and being less likely to think of shopping as a thing you need to leave your house to do. So, I tend to, I'm a little bit cautious about sort of saying e-commerce is bad. I think that's not something that my book actually says.
Right.
Because I think it's probably the die was cast when the internet came around, and there's a lot of positives to e-commerce. We all needed that during the pandemic, and it can be really good for older people who have mobility issues, people with young children who don't want to take their kids into stores because it's a nightmare. Is the issue here, that e-commerce exists and it's going to reshape our downtowns? Or is it, about having a kind of, having such large players within a business area like e-commerce that can really skew and that whole business area, both for kind of suppliers, like the people who are trying to sell on e-commerce, and for consumers.
Right. And you talk a lot, this all gets back to the idea of kind of mindful consumers and consumerism and understanding the consequences. And you talk a lot about how Amazon lulls us to sleep in a way. Our comfort and our served self forgets to think about all those long-time consequences. I know we're going to open this up to questions, and I do want to give you a chance to talk about some of the things you end your book with. But I do have one more question that, when you talk about books, that really is of interest, I think, to this audience and to DPLA. And that is that very interesting idea you posit that because of the because, for example, video is kind of presented as a loss leader, if you will, to attract people to the Prime membership, there's something about the move from a curated experience of media, books and video, art, we could say, to a somewhat mass appeal of just treating it like an overall commodity and not seeming to pay as much attention to the individual quality and to the differentiation of that media. You talk about how that you consider could really be harming artists or harming our experience of culture in this way, masking us and removing us from the care about that. Can you talk a little bit about that? I thought that was a really interesting nuance, really. Maybe it's not so nuanced, but it was a very interesting outcome of what's happening.
Yes, thank you. So that's one of the things I reflected on. I have a chapter focused on Amazon's book business and another one focused on its media and video business in the book. And, what are the consequences to having these products being sold and distributed online and through a platform like Amazon. And one of the things I started to think about is that, in a way, art and culture, it's always been a commodity, right? Like it's always been commodified in terms of like, we need to sell it for a price, or we're going to like put art on television and use it to sell, advertising, access to the audiences, to advertisers. But with platforms that have like kind of unlimited capacity, I started to think about how it actually is almost commoditizing, like turning, you know, art and culture into a commodity like oil or corn or soybeans. Like there's a lot of it, you know, and I see Amazon's the way it markets and the way it sells art and culture as sometimes being like, oh, this is very special. Like right now, Amazon has, you know, the Ring of Power. And it's like, ooh, you know, we have a very special thing. You can't see it anywhere else. You know, we put a lot of money into making this, you know, cinema quality TV series. But actually, a lot of the draw and a lot of the way they, you know, try and pull people to the platform and keep us in it is by saying there's just a lot. Right? There's a lot of video, you know, it's like unlimited. There's a lot of books on the, you know, say on a Kindle subscription. So just trying, you know, this idea of sort of media by volume is something that I really started to pick up on. And it's kind of, you know, I think platform logics bias towards a media by volume logic because it's an unlimited, you know, capacity, or, you know, you can search and there can be more and more, and that's seemed to be appealing to the user. And part of what I sort of think is trying to keep people again within Amazon's platforms or pleasure garden, you know, like you'll never run out. And I thought that might not be the logic for creating art and culture that is the best, you know, you know, so it's something I try and point out.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks, Cindy. Those are great questions.
Yeah, thank you both. Time went by so fast. We're at 1:45, just about. Thank you for that great conversation. So we now have time for some questions from the audience. So please put any questions you would like to ask in the Q&A if you haven't already.
You know, I can keep going.
Yeah, I'm fine. I'm good with that.
There's so many, you've just got my brain really going with this book. It was very fun. Let's see if the audience, okay, here we go. I'm curious about Emily's take on the iRobot acquisition. A lot of people speculate that it's another in-home surveillance play, like the Echo Show.
Yeah. So in fact, Amazon is beta testing Astro. It's a little robot, a domestic robot, and no doubt there've been corporate acquisitions around that too. They also just acquired Roomba, right? That, you know, so which is the vacuum. So yeah, they're absolutely leaning in to you know, to mix my tech company illusions there into the Internet of Things, and it's very just continuous, absolutely, with Alexa. You know, I mean, the kinds of so, you know, in that example that the vice president, senior vice president of Alexa was saying, you know, if you're in a room but you've left a light on, like Alexa wants to let you know that. So that's the kind of service, but even more so that this robot is being marketed to offer. So like if you're out of the house and you want to check if you left your stove on, you know, it's going to go look, or if there's a strange noise, it will check it out for you. So you know, having a mobile thing, and of course people have been gotten used to this already with the Roomba, right? You know, having an autonomous thing that moves around your house and does something. So I'm just guessing there's going to be something that's both the vacuum and the, you know, the domestic help robot that's coming very soon, that combines those functions. And offers this, you know, the kind of care and like attentiveness that Alexa is already trying to offer, but doing so in a mobile object that would have a few more things that it could do. Like, I don't know, you can put a beer in it and send it to your spouse in the other room or something like that. Some of it's very silly, you know, but, you know, there's things like this that, you know, we thought we never would need. And then somehow people have it. And then again, it's like, oh, it's like, you know, the bar for convenience and ease, I feel like keeps moving. And Amazon is part of what I think moves that.
You know, Kazu Ishiguro wrote Clara and the Sun, and if you haven't read that, about the integration of AI into our lives, it's a fascinating book. So you talk about consumers and what you think consumers can do. There's a question here about libraries in particular. Do you have any thoughts about what libraries can do to, I don't know, in a way they're competing against Amazon. They too that have their issues around ebooks, which have been largely publicized. But in general, do they play a part in this awareness raising? Do they help consumers understand consequences? Do they get what they need? What are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, I don't know. I think I might defer to you on this question, Cindy. You know, I hadn't thought so much about the library angle. I mean, one thing I would be interested in thinking about is the way in which libraries would have traditionally thought of themselves as the way in which people at least would, like, that's where you would go at least to research about books. Right. But now Amazon is in, like, as I said, like it's a service that people use for like information commodities, you know, even if they're not going to buy on the platform. So it makes me think about the ways in which Amazon is competing with libraries on multiple fronts. And of course, then I think, well, libraries, you know, they're fantastic. And I'm so glad we have them. But I also know, I'm sure they're very underfunded. Like that just seems like a David and Goliath type of competition, if you will. Now, of course, libraries, they offer some things that Amazon could never replace, like just that local community space, the programming, anyone may enter, like that is just so precious. And so, heaven forbid that the fact that people can get books relatively cheaply and easily on Amazon would undermine that. On the other hand, I will say, I think part of Amazon's market dominance in these, that we've been talking about, I'm not sure that things are so cheap necessarily on Amazon, or certainly that they will continue to be so, because that's sort of the natural consequence of becoming so dominant in something like book sales is like, they know that a lot of people don't bother checking outside Amazon, especially Prime members. That's kind of documented. So, there's not the biggest incentive for them to keep prices that low. But yeah, what do you think about what libraries can and should do?
Well, I will say this, which is one of the things that libraries do so well is create a sense of community. And they're even in a big city, there are many branch libraries. And as you and I were talking about last time, and even today more when we talk about your hometown, I think one of the key answers to how to combat and balance our need for convenience, our need for choice, with the things we lose is this concept of local, very, very local. We need to build community. We need to know our neighbors. We need to know who's invested in our communities. And, you talk about this in the book too, when you talk about how consumers can respond to this, that we have to be players and have a voice and understand the choices we're making. You mentioned something about transparency I thought was interesting. That wouldn't it be interesting if Amazon said, you could have this in 2 days, you can have it in 4, you could have it in a week. Oh, by the way, here's the carbon footprint count of what your choices look like. And you said, they don't want to burden the consumer. They don't want the consumer's brain to switch into critically assessing the costs of their convenience. But what if there was more of a partnership, an agreed upon strategy for balancing the convenience versus consumers' desire to make the right choices? Can you imagine a real world? Can you imagine how that could look different or be different?
Yeah, I've been trying to, in terms of concrete ideas, one observation is just that I do think a lot of people I've talked to about Amazon have a vague sense of guilt. You know what I mean? They're like, something seems wrong or off here, like, should I have so many boxes on my stoop? But not really being able to put their finger on if it's bad or why. And so I think that does speak to the transparency issue. And I I've thought about the ways that workers are organized, like Amazon workers in particular, and how they have put pressure on the company to make various kinds of changes. They've been moderately successful in that regard to kind of keep Amazon honest to its own stated values. But we don't really have that so much on the consumer side. And I understand why. Like, we're all Amazon consumers in our own little houses, and we all are consumers in quite different ways. There are some brick and mortar concepts for Amazon, but not that many yet. So we don't really encounter each other in public. I think, Amazon often actually speaks on our behalf, saying, oh, we do this for consumers because consumers are delighted. They look at all the, purchases they've done. And yet, could there be something more collective that consumers can do to be more organized and say, okay, yes, you've done the fulfillment center tours open to the public, it's very limited, right? What you really learn on that. Right. But could we have some more meaningful transparency, or partner with you as some kind of more organized collective consumer organization to say, we actually want to know, what the consequences are of these various choices, how much does it cost, in terms of carbon, or even to the company, or to extra stress on employees to send me that box of pens in a day, right. We have no way of knowing that. You sort of get a sense it's probably not good, but how, in what exactly how, it's really hard to know.
Right. Well, I envision, because I am an optimistic person, and I do carry the vestiges of the old Amazon when I think of the company. And I think we know their employees who care about this a lot. There have been walkouts. You talked about that in your book too. We know their consumers who care. The company is trying to have the right image. It does care about that to some degree, despite its overwhelming market power. And so, the current CEO is someone I remember very fondly, quite honestly, from my very early days. So again, I want to believe that there could be this conversation, this kind of agreement, because you raise such important points about, in general, about consumer awareness, about our role that we play in how things unfold, and frankly, the role of software engineers in understanding that drive, what they're doing, and what the consequences are. It's an interesting, complicated world, the platform capitalism world. So
yeah. I mean, I think I would also want to make a plug, though, for the idea of regulation, which is that we might have some positive feelings about certain moves that Amazon's made, or the personnel who are in place and their good faith efforts, but what if in 5 years or 10 years it's different people in charge, right, and they're not making those kinds of decisions, right? Or they pretend to do one thing and they're doing something very different behind the scenes, that is, and working really hard to keep that a secret. And I think just in general, when a company gets that big, it kind of, its power starts to tip into that of, that affects the whole market, that it kind of becomes a power of governance. And so I think that's where the question of regulation is really important. Maybe we need to take antitrust more seriously. We need to take conflicts of interest more seriously. Like, oh, you're the platform, you host where exchanges take place, selling takes place, but you also sell on that platform. Right. There's just the unfettered acquisitions that Amazon's been able to make. All of these things they're being looked at, I think, quite seriously now, but I don't know that much has concretely changed yet. And it's just, sometimes even, if at this point in time you think, oh, what Amazon's doing isn't that bad, but do we want to paint ourselves into that corner where a company is that big? And not just Amazon, of course, but that's what's happened with a lot of tech.
Right. No, you raised some very important questions, and consumer awareness is the first step. So I personally think everyone should read this book. I've got one more comment here that I think is a nice kind of closing remark here. And so I'd like to read it to you. And it says, I really appreciated and could feel your conflict as both a researcher objectively studying Amazon and a customer who appreciates the heads up about the missing reimbursement. I also appreciated the insight of how Alexa is viewed not only as an intruder, but as a caretaker and a giver. In the early days, it felt like public conversation was much more suspicious of Alexa listening, But Amazon seems to have done an excellent PR job of turning that to a positive. To your point, we've been lulled into a sense of security and, that we are, and trust. But it is, I think at the core of this is one cautionary tale from a very big picture, and consumers need to wake up in a way. I think of Wall-E. Do you remember that movie? And all the people were, zooming around on couches, sipping drinks. They were all overweight. They had the same face, and they seemed to have no will. And that seems like a perfect example of the subject to the served self transition.
Yeah.
Maybe a dark note to end on. Perhaps you want to say something nice in our last 2 minutes.
Yeah, I just wanted to show, express my appreciation for folks who commented and asked questions. And yeah, that's, in looking at Alexa, it just really struck me. And I think this is what the comment's getting at, that we think of surveillance as something that's being hidden, or that, companies won't let us know what's happening, and it's, and that does happen, I think, with like a lot of apps that we're using. Like, we don't really appreciate the full extent. And I'm sure Amazon does some surveillance that's not sort of on the up and up, or that we're not so aware of. But in general, it offers surveillance as a service. It invites us to subscribe to things that essentially are, involve ongoing surveillance of us in order to provide this more personalized, ongoing, like, in my book, I talk about Amazon Key, which is this thing where, like, you can have a smart lock, and Amazon can send people into your house to clean up or fix things when you're not even there. I mean, it's sort of extending this idea of personal domestic service, via this big digital platform. So just the way that that's being normalized, I think Amazon's on the forefront of that, but it is much more broadly available from other companies. That's something I think for us to really reflect on.
Yes. Well, Emily, thank you. It was such a pleasure.
Thank you so much, Cindy. I really appreciate that you read my book and that you asked such amazing questions.
Thanks so much to both of you. That was fantastic. So for folks who are on the call, if you'd like to learn more about Buy Now, please see the link in the chat. And thank you all for taking time out of your day to join us for this conversation. Goodbye.
Thanks
everybody. Thanks for coming.
Bye-bye. Thanks,
Bye.
everyone.